Alrighty, good evening everyone. Welcome back to another Southern. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I originally was going to be here 30 minutes early because I left the city at around 6:30, but then realised when I got onto South Road that I'd put in Port Wakefield as my destination, so got here a little bit late, but that's all good. We're up and rolling. Tonight we've got Samson, and we're going to have that given to us by brother Chris Lawrie. But before we have that, we're going to open with a hymn. That's hymn 163. Let's just open in prayer. Abba, Father, as we gather here today to delve into the incredible story of Samson, we humbly come before you, seeking your guidance, wisdom, and understanding. We acknowledge that every lesson we learn is a gift from you, and we thank you for the opportunity to study and grow in our knowledge of your word. We ask for your blessings upon this class as we explore the life of Samson. Help us to see beyond the surface of this remarkable figure and discover the deeper spiritual truths and lessons that his story holds. May the insights we gain from his experiences inspire us to live our lives in accordance with your divine plan. As a youth group, we want to especially ask for the blessing on Brother Chris tonight. Be with him to guide his words and his thoughts as you have so far in his study, and as well as Ben as he expresses some short thoughts to us as well. We're so thankful that we're surrounded by a group of people who love us, learning more about a book inspired by someone who loves us even more. We thank you for this love, Father. We leave all that we do tonight and from now on in your care, asking this through our living intercessor, Jesus Christ. Amen. Now, before we have a talk tonight, we have a little 3-minute spiel by Benno, and when I asked him what he was doing his talk on, Ben said, Ben's going to talk to us about a young man who's recently been baptised into the truth after growing up in Orthodox Jewish family. So thanks, Ben.
All right. So tonight we'll be looking at Josh Elcrom. He's the guy in the brown jumper next to Josh Wallace, my uncle. And then next to Josh, there's Jason Kelly. And then, probably as you all know by now, there's James Diliberto. So Josh Elcrom is a Jewish young man from Melbourne, and he goes to the Canterbury Ecclesia. You probably recognise him from Hebron, and he's been to End of Years as well, the last End of Years here. He was born in an Orthodox Jewish family, so that means that his family studied the Torah, and they strictly obeyed the Sabbath, religious festivals, holy days, and the dietary laws. I asked him how religiously strict was your family, and he said that on Shabbat, which is every single Saturday, they turned all the power out. They didn't have any power in their house. They didn't drive any cars around, and it got to the point where their dad wasn't even letting them rip off toilet paper from the toilet roll. They had to go and get tissues because they just didn't want to do anything to make God angry, or they just didn't want to do anything on that day. So how did Josh come to know the truth? Well, he went to high school with Jason Kelly, the man on his right there. And they didn't do anything overly religious throughout school. They did music band together. And then when Jason got baptized a few years ago, he invited Josh along. And this was the first time I met him as well. And Josh, I asked him, what kind of convinced you to come along? And he said on that day, on Jason's baptism, he was so not convinced, he was inspired by how convicted Jason was in his confession of faith that day, and he knew it really meant to him. And being a childhood friend, it meant a lot to him to see how convicted Jason was. So from then on, things slowly progressed for Josh, mainly because of COVID, but he did baptism study when he could. He came along to youth groups, and even came over here for end-of-year studies. He said some difficult Bible topics for him was the kingdom, because it wasn't talked about in his culture at all. But he turned to Zechariah and Daniel for encouragement. And then he started mirroring passages from the Old Testament and the New Testament. He said when it came to being baptized, he was extremely scared because his family obviously was Orthodox Jewish, and they would not want him going to another religion. And he said he had a great conversation with James Diliberto, and James asked him, "What is stopping you?" Just like to the Ethiopian eunuch. And from that moment, he just decided that he thought, "Stop it, I'm being baptized, following what I really think is true." And I think that's super inspirational. And he was baptized last month on the 7th of October. I asked him, what would you say is a take home? What can people take home from, your story? And he said, you've got to find out for yourself. It's all well and good to sit here in your seats and listen to talks and, come to the meeting, go to Bible class, youth groups. It's all good and well, but what you have to do, you must do your own personal Bible study to strengthen your faith and be convicted in yourself.
Thanks very much, Ben. It's always good to put a story to a face. I think it goes to show for everyone sitting here, whether you're baptized or unbaptized, just how powerful how you live your life can be on other people. Obviously tonight we've got Brother Chris giving us a talk on Samson, but before we do, we're going to have a reading from Judges 16, and I'll ask Brother Sam Matakanance, hope I pronounced that properly, to come read that, and then I'll call up Uncle Chris straight after, if that's so good. Cheers.
All right. Reading Judges 16. Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw therein a harlot, and went in unto her. And he was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, In the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him." And Samson laid till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Shorek, whose name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, "Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver." And Delilah said unto Samson, "Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee." And Samson said unto her, "If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as any other man." Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. And there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. And she said unto him, "The Philistines have come upon thee, Samson, and break the withs, as the thread of tow is broken, which is toucheth the fire." So his strength was not known. And Delilah said unto Samson, "Behold, thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound." And he said unto her, "If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weak and be as any other man." Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him therewith, and said unto them, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." And there were liers in wait, abiding in the chamber. And he brake them off his arms like a thread. And Delilah said unto Samson, "Hitherto thou hast mocked me, and hast told me lies. Tell me, wherewith thou mightest be bound." And he said unto her, "If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web." And she fastened it with a pin, and said unto them, "The Philistines come upon thee, Samson." And he wakened out of his sleep, and went away with the pin of the beam, and with the web. And she said unto him, "How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth." And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, "There hath not a razor upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." And he woke out of his sleep, and said, "I will go out as at other times before, and shake myself." And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again, after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, Suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee. Only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars, upon which the house stood, and which it was borne up, of one which his right hand, and of the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the burying place of Manoah, his father. And he judged Israel 20 years.
All right, hello everyone. Nice to be with you all tonight. So Samson, and continuing your theme, life-changing moments. So this has been a ripper study. I've really enjoyed it, and this Samson is a really interesting Bible character. And he's so different to a lot of the other characters we've got in the Bible because we're mostly told about his slip-ups. We're told he judged Israel for 20 years, but the 3 chapters that we've got here don't speak much about. Well, it doesn't seem like there's much good stuff in there. It's just a lot of his slip-ups. But as I've read through this story, I'm so thankful that my life isn't recorded for all people down through the ages to read about, like Samson is. And before we get into tonight, I just want to read 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Because Paul here is talking about the children of Israel in the wilderness, but this applies to us too. Now we read, Now these things happened to them as an example. They were written about for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. So it's important to remember that the things that we read about tonight, they're not written for Samson's sake. He's dead in the grave. And it's not written for the person next to you either. It's written for you. And everything we talk about tonight is just as relevant back then as it is today. Human nature and all the temptations that Samson faced are the same ones that we all do. And if you just turn up to Hebrews 11 with me, please. So another thing I want to talk about is how God sees Samson. So Hebrews 11, and reading from verse 32, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight." So many of these things talk about Samson here. And God sees Samson as a man of faith. Samson's going to be in the kingdom. And this in itself is a really important lesson. How often do we find ourselves trying to do God's work for him, trying to guess who's worthy? Without what we just read in Hebrews, we might have written Samson off, but how wrong we would be. And as we go through this story tonight, it's my prayer that you might gain a deeper insight into our Heavenly Father and his incredible love for all of you. Now there's heaps in these few chapters tonight, but I'm going to spend a bit of time on some of them and lots of time on the others. So let's start. Judges 13 verse 1. "And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines." Now this was the pattern of Israel ever since they came into the land. There was sin, suffering, they'd seek God, God would send them a deliverer, and then this would repeat. But things have got so bad at this stage that we don't even read about the people crying out to God anymore. And this is the stage on which Samson arrives. Yet despite this, in verse 3, an angel of the Lord appears to the woman, and we read that she hasn't been able to have kids. But the angel tells her she's going to get pregnant and she's going to give birth to a son. And this man is going to be a Nazarite from birth, who shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So why this family? Well, when Israel had entered the promised land and told to go and seize their inheritance, the tribe of Dan had trouble taking the land that God had promised to them. They were one of the biggest tribes and they only had to get a small chunk of land, but they couldn't do it. So what did they do? Well, they went up north, found this little sleepy town called Laish, killed everyone there, claimed the town as their own, and then went and called it the city of Dan. And then Joshua 19 talks a lot about this, but a few of the names that come up in this when you go to Joshua 19 are things like Timnath, Zorah, and Eshtaol. These are all towns that should have been under the Israelites' control, but they're not. They're under the Philistines. But Samson's parents are different. We read in verse 2 of Judges 13 that although the rest of their tribe had legged it to the easier country, these guys had settled in Zorah, their God-given inheritance. Life was hard. They're oppressed by the Philistines, but they'd held tight to their inheritance. And maybe God was answering their prayers when God said he was going to provide a deliverer through them. So we read he's to be a Nazarite. Now this was a special vow you could take. Numbers 6 talks about all of this, but it's a voluntary decision. It's a choice you make to dedicate yourself to God for a set amount of time. Samson's mum is told that this man's going to be a Nazarite from the womb to the day of his death. So it's different to how it normally plays out. And his mum's told that his hair must never be cut. God had chosen Samson before he even was. He had a plan for him. It was to begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And all of us here tonight, just like Samson, have been chosen by God. He knew us before the foundation of the world. And he has big plans for us too, if we let him in. So although normally a Nazarite was a choice you make, God choosing Samson in the womb didn't remove his free will. Samson still had the choice to follow God or not. And this is our amazing God. He wants our all, but he's not going to force us. He's given us free will, which is an extremely vulnerable thing to do. Now, I'm sure you've all heard that word vulnerable before. I feel like I'm hearing it a lot lately. But as an example, imagine there's this girl or guy you like. Maybe they're here tonight. You've got two options. You can play it safe. You can wait until there's some really obvious signs that they're into you as well. You can maybe ask their friend all that awkward stuff. Or you could take the risk. You can let them know how you feel, and fingers crossed they like you back. And this is the risk our Heavenly Father has taken. In 1 John 4 verse 19, we love him because he first loved us. God took the initiative. Or Romans 5 verse 8, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God created us. He could have made us all love him, but that's not our God. He loved us first, and he wants us to respond to his love. So we have a choice. We can love him back, or we could turn our backs to him, which is also an option. It's going to devastate him, but like we said, he won't force us. It's ultimately our choice. And God has chosen all of us here tonight. And through this story, we're going to see the unbelievable patience and mercy of God as Samson gets sidetracked, makes silly choices, even turns his back on God throughout his 20 years as a judge. But how ultimately God's purpose is still carried out. So hang in there is a happy ending. So let's read Judges 13 verse 24 to 25. And the woman bare a son and called his name Samson. The child grew and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. That's an interesting statement. The Spirit moved him at times. Or better translated, the Spirit agitated him. Samson was getting agitated at the fact there were Philistines living in the land that God had given to him and his tribe. Remember, God had chosen Samson to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. So agitated, in fact, that one day he goes down to Timnath. This should have been inhabited by the tribe of Dan all those years ago, but it's still under Philistine rule. And Samson has the best intentions. He's going to go down there and start to begin to deliver Israel. And just like that, Judges 14 verse 1, he sees a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And this is the first of 3 women that are going to get Samson into trouble. Verse 2, he comes home to mum and dad. I've seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. He doesn't even try to sugarcoat it. What's going on? His parents can't believe it. This is the man who's going to begin to deliver Israel. They've watched him grow. They've seen how God's been with him. They try to talk him out of it. Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people? But his reply is, get her for me, because she pleases me well, or she's right in my eyes. And this is what we read in the last verse of Judges chapter 21. It's like the summary of the Judges. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And this shows us just how strong our emotions can be. You could say he was even on a spiritual high of sorts. But just like that, he's sidetracked by his eyes. This all seems pretty fast. He hardly knows the girl. All he really knows about her is she's a Philistine, the enemy of his people, and she looks good. And this is just like Eve in the garden with the fruit. As his mind dwelt on her, he wanted to marry her. This isn't love, it's called lust. But the problem is, lust can consume you. Samson here couldn't see reason. He had wise parents, but he didn't listen to them. So people, listen to your parents. I know what you're all thinking, yeah, cool story. But in all seriousness, I've got kids of my own now, and I realise how much parents actually do care for you and want what's best for you. It's not that I've become all wise and grown up. Far from it. I still feel just as immature as ever. But come to us with tough decisions. Heck, I still go to my parents for advice every now and then. And if only because they've been around longer. They've got more experience to draw on. Maybe some of you don't have great relationships with your parents. but there's always uncles and aunties, or even friends of your parents to go and talk to. Sadly, it doesn't appear that Samson really had any close friends. If they did, they could have been a real source of strength for him. Often good friends can see things we can't, especially when our emotions are getting the best of us. Or maybe you might have to be that friend. Although it's not easy, you have to speak up when you see your mates doing something stupid. And I heard this good saying the other day: an enemy stabs you in the back, but a true friend stabs you in the front. I.e., they tell you hard truths to your face. In chapter 14, verse 4, we have thrown in here, they knew not that it was of the Lord. Now, this isn't saying God's happy with Samson's choice here, but God is going to use the weakness of Samson to bring about his will. So Samson goes down with the best intentions, sees a woman, and loses sight of the reason he's even in Timnath. And this is Samson's downfall: lust of the eyes. And none of us can say, "Oh, Samson, you're unbelievable. I would never." Because we're made of the same stuff. And his mistakes aren't recorded so we can shake our heads and feel good about ourselves. Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. And this is a really good quote for what Samson's battling with, and what all of us battle with. This isn't anything new. Plenty of faithful people have been caught up with the lust of the eyes. The woman, she's a Philistine, the daughter of the enemy. He's getting into dangerous territory here, and his parents could see it, but his mind was definitely not worrying about that right now. Now, marrying someone is a really big deal. You want to make sure you really know the person, like really know them. Lust and love are very different. And I got told this at a Southern years ago: looks fade, and if that's all there is, you're in trouble. And you want to marry someone that loves God. Remember, he or she is going to be a parent to one of your kids, God willing. Are they going to help you be a better person? Until death do us part could be a really long time. So then we read in Judges 14, verses 5 to 6. We're just going to go through here pretty quick. But Samson's walking through a vineyard, and a lion roars against him. And verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord comes mightily upon him, and he rips it in half. Now, this isn't normal. I've heard maybe this was God showing Samson that when he goes against the Philistines and they roar against him, God will be with him and strengthen him just like he did with that lion. God is still trying to work with Samson, trying to guide him. But later in this story, we read of Samson telling the Philistines a riddle about a lion and some honey. No idea where he got that from. But sadly, Samson had missed the point God was trying to teach him. And instead, Samson uses this riddle as an opportunity to give the Philistines a hard time, knowing they'll never figure it out, and so have to pay up 30 changes of clothes. Once again, God is going to use Samson's weakness to bring about his purpose. The story of Samson shows us that God works with flawed people, and this is good news for all of us. The Philistines can't figure it out, so they go to Samson's wife and threaten to kill her and her family if she can't get the answer. Judges 14, verse 16. And Samson's wife wept before him and said, "You do but hate me and love me not. You've put forth a riddle unto the children of my people and has not told it me." And he said to her, "Behold, I haven't told it to my father nor my mother, and shall I tell it to thee?" Does that sound weird to you? She's worried about her people, the Philistines, and Samson's response is, "Well, I haven't even told my parents. Why would I tell you?" You can see that Samson and this woman see life very differently. They're going different directions. This marriage is going to make Samson, fulfilling his calling, really hard and possibly take his heart away from God. But we're going to see that God doesn't let this happen. Verse 17, he finally cracks after she's been relentless, nagging, and he tells her. And then we read, she tells the riddle to the children of her people, the Philistines. And then the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He goes to the town of Ashkelon, kills 30 men, takes their clothes, and gives it to the other 30 guys to pay his debt. And then we read he goes up to his father's house. Meanwhile, Samson's wife is given to his best man at the wedding. So as we read this story, we can see through Samson's silly life choices, God still achieves his purpose with Samson, even though things could have gone so much smoother and less heartache if he'd reined in his lusts. And as we go through his life, you see that as soon as Samson chooses spirit over flesh, God's with him and gives him strength to get on with his mission. Samson's wife being given to his best man was a blessing here from God, saving him from a really bad situation, although I doubt Samson saw it that way. And it's super hard to see God working in our lives for good, especially when things don't go how we planned. But God really loves us and goes to so much effort to save us, when sometimes we don't even want saving. So it all started with Samson agitated by the Spirit. He goes down to Timnath, ready to cause some grief to the Philistines, gets caught up with a woman, who because of that ends up killing 30 men when the Spirit comes upon him. Then his wife is given to his companion, so he goes and catches 300 foxes, as you do, sets them on fire and devastates all their food. And not just the stuff in the field, but all the poles of corn that they just harvested. He burns up all their vineyards and olives. And you don't get these overnight. These take ages to grow. So this was a massive blow to the Philistines. And this would take years to recover from. And because of that, they kill her anyway. And then Samson goes and kills some more Philistines. And then he goes and lives in a rock Etam. And then we got Judah, his own people, go up to this rock of Etam with 3,000 people to go and catch him and hand him over to the Philistines. They're quite happy living under Philistine rule. It's unbelievable. They go up to their judge Samson, the guy that God gave them to begin to deliver them from these people, and they bind him and hand him over to the Philistines. And there's heaps of types of Christ in this story. Jesus also was betrayed by his own people. And in 15 verse 14, the Spirit of God comes upon him, he grabs a jawbone of an ass and kills 1,000 people with it. And just like we read at the start in verse 25, the Spirit moved him at times. When Samson was carrying out his calling, God was with him. He just killed 1,000 men with a jawbone. But we read at times. The other times, he's giving into his flesh. And we know all about this. It's the battle that never gives up, going on in all of our minds constantly. What the flesh wants and what the Spirit wants. And Paul reminds us of this in Romans 7 verse 19. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. It's super easy to read Samson's story and see where Samson went wrong, to see how because of bad choices this happens and that happens. It's not that he's not forgiven, but life still has to play out. And sometimes we've hurt people along the way, or ourselves even, and consequences still remain. And after he kills those 1,000 men with the jawbone, we read in verse 20, Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Now the Bible tells us this again at the end of his life. So it's a bit strange that it's thrown in here in the middle. But I think the writer is reminding us that there was much more to Samson's life than just these 3 chapters. And that what comes next in the story wasn't who Samson was. It was just a big low in his life. And I think this next incident is similar to what we read about at the start, where he goes down to Timnath with the best intentions, but his flesh got the better of him. So 16 verse 1, Samson went to Gaza and saw a prostitute and went in unto her. Now Solomon gives lots of warnings to his son on this subject. and I'm sure it's from Solomon's personal experience. Now, I just want to talk a little bit on this subject. Nothing too awkward, so don't worry. So I'm just going to read out Proverbs 7. While I was at the window of my house, looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked common sense. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. The woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. She was the brash, rebellious type, never content to stay at home. She's often in the streets and markets, soliciting at every corner. She threw her arms around him and kissed him, and with a brazen look she said, "I've just made my peace offerings and fulfilled my vows. You're the one I was looking for. I came out to find you, and here you are. My bed is spread with beautiful blankets, with coloured sheets of Egyptian linen. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink our fill of love until morning. Let's enjoy each other's caresses. For my husband is not home, he's away on a long trip. He has taken a wallet full of money with him and won't return until later this month." So she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. He followed her at once, like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. He was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing it would cost him his life. So listen to me, my sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your heart stray toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path, for she has been the ruin of many. Many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. It's almost hard to read that. You feel anxious for this guy. It seems so clear reading it, just like we did. You can see this is going to go bad. Don't go down there. Like Samson, this guy didn't go looking for this, but he gave in to lust. And James 1 verse 14 to 15. But each man is tempted when he is dragged away by his own lust and enticed. Then the lust, when it has conceived, carries sin. And the sin, when it is fully grown, brings death. There's this saying I use a lot. Pick your battles. As in, know the ones you're not going to win. And this is one of those. The lesson here is don't even go down that road. Take the long way round. In your relationships when you're dating, talking from experience, controlling your emotions is going to be your number one challenge. It's the elephant in the room. Every couple has had to battle this, your parents even. So you're not alone. But like this story we read, it doesn't end well when we give in to lust. Emotions are strong beasties. Some advice. Unlike the guy in the story, avoid that road. Don't think you've got enough self-control and it'll all be fine. It's always safer to hang out with other people instead of just each other. Pray about it together. It might feel a bit awkward, but if you're going to marry this person, you might as well start practicing praying together now. If you really love this person, wait for both their sake and yours. I know you think I'm going to marry this person anyway, but what if you don't? And you're not alone in this. Talk to your parents. Ask for their help in keeping you accountable. They're made of the same stuff you are. You're not going to shock them, I guarantee it. So Samson's done something really stupid. He's just slept with a prostitute. He's at one of the lowest points in his life. And as we read in 16 verse 1, we're devastated for him, just as his Father in heaven would have been devastated as well. We've all done stupid things. Imagine if our story was written down, our life laid out bare. How would our story read? Would we be shaking our heads, getting nervous as we turn the next page, knowing what's on the next page? So now what? Well, I want you to really listen to this next bit because it's super important. Sadly, most of you are going to experience some real lows in your life. Times when you know you really let God down. You're going to feel ashamed, angry, disappointed. What next? Well, what you feel like doing is hiding from God. you feel you can't talk to him. And just when you need to be close to God, you feel the most distant. But what did Samson do? Let's read 16 verse 3. And Samson lay till midnight, and then arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all. He put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. This place, this Gaza, was a fortress. These gates would have been a monster. They would have weighed tons. And we're told he grabbed the gate along with the whole lot, puts them on his shoulders, and carries them uphill for 65 k's. Like from Brighton Hall to Hebron campsite. Like, this is just so ridiculous that any man could do this. And that's the point. It is. There's no way that any man could do this on his own. What we're told here is that it's God's strength and not Samson's. As soon as Samson came to his senses and makes the decision to leave, God gives him strength. This is our Heavenly Father. Yes, he was sad as he watched his child making bad choices, but as soon as he came to his senses, God was there. So for us, talk to God. Tell him what's happened. He knows anyway, but it's important to give it to him. And get back up again. In Proverbs we read, a just man falls 7 times and rises up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief. He's not just because he falls, but because he gets back up and tries again. So remember, when you stuff up, it's not over. Own it, pray for forgiveness, and then we get back up. And then we read in Judges 16 verse 4, afterward he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. Oh, Samson, no. And what's worse, we read he loves this woman. We haven't read this about the other 2. Unlike the woman in Timnath, who had to be threatened with death to betray Samson, Delilah's happy to do it for money. We'll read verse 5 of Judges 16. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said to her, entice him and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give you, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. So I'm sure you're familiar with this story, how she tried many times to get him to tell her his secret. And now each time, Samson gave in a little bit more and told her it got closer and closer to his actual secret. But let's jump to verse 15. And she said unto him, how can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and has not told me wherein your great strength lieth. So if you ever find yourself in a relationship with someone, and they try to convince you to do the wrong thing by saying things like Delilah did, things like, oh, if you loved me, you'd do this, or if you don't do this, you don't love me. We call this red flags. These are like the warning signs that you do not want to be with these people, right? These are going to get you into trouble, and you're going to do things that you shouldn't be doing. So you've got to do a Joseph and you run away when you start seeing all those, oh, but if you love me, all that kind of stuff that Delilah was doing to Samson here. But then verse 17, tragically, he tells her his secret. He tells her all his heart. And it's worth colouring this word in. All his heart comes up 3 times in verses 17 and 18. And it's super tragic. Samson was meant to love his God with all his heart, soul and strength. But here we read, Samson has given his heart to Delilah. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Delilah wore him down. And this is what sin does. It's relentless. It's the battle that never gives up. Our emotions can so easily get the better of us. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. We only need to think about it for a few seconds, and our mind starts justifying whatever it is. We're professionals at this. Love is blind. You ever heard that saying before? What it means is, all Samson is seeing is rainbows and unicorns from this woman Delilah. She's already tried to uncover his secret 3 times, and he can't even see that she doesn't even love him. And this is another good lesson for choosing partners. Listen to advice from mum and dad and your friends. Sometimes they might be seeing things that we just can't see because we're so wrapped up in this person. And Samson's been playing with fire for too long. That voice in his head that says, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, that's long gone. He's become so numb to his vow that he falls asleep on the enemy's lap while she shaves off his hair. And then we read Judges 16 verse 19. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. Now, there's nothing magical about Samson's hair. His hair was just a symbol. It's a symbol of the covenant that God had made with him. His long hair represented his relationship with God. Samson had chosen Delilah over God. And so the shaving off of his head represented what's going on in his mind. He'd walked out on God. But just to make it sadder than it already was, he's then betrayed by the woman that he'd just given up God for. And then verse 21, but the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Those eyes that had caused him so much grief were gouged out. Now we can say it from here that Samson losing his eyes was a blessing. This was God actually saving Samson, we're going to see. Although there's no way Samson's mind was considering that at the time. And often we don't see the hand of God in our lives till much later. But now that his eyes are gone, without distractions, he begins to finally see clearly. He's got time in that prison to think about his life, playing over and over his stupid decisions, remembering his calling. He was destined for big things. Maybe even finally seeing God's hand at work in his life. Now, if Samson had a life-changing moment, I think losing his eyes was it. It's from here we start to see a different Samson. And then verse 22, before long his hair began to grow back. I love reading that. We know his hair represented his relationship with God, and it's growing back. He begins to appreciate how he's let his God down. He can hear the Philistines worshipping their god Dagon, celebrating in their temple how their God beat Samson's God. Imagine how Samson felt hearing about this, thinking about how he was called to begin to deliver Israel, and here he is in the hands of the enemy, being laughed at, and worse than that, he's caused them to laugh at his God. Now, we'd never ask for tough times, but often in life, God brings us to this point where we are in so deep, it's like there's no way out. When all our troubles and worries seem so much bigger than us. And it's in these times that we turn to God. When God is all you've got, you realise God is all you need. Samson is brought to the temple of the Philistine god Dagon. He's put between 2 pillars facing their God to show the strength of their God versus Samson's God. And God allows this to happen. He allows the Philistines to mock his holy name. God could easily have taken Samson out, take him out of the picture, could have moved on to another judge. But our awesome God is going to allow both himself, the creator of the universe, and Samson to be mocked and made a joke of in a temple of a strange God in order to save Samson eternally and bring about deliverance to his people. And this is our God, and just another window into the lengths God goes to save his children. And then we got verse 28, Samson's prayer. And Samson called unto Yahweh and said, Lord Yahweh, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this time, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. In this prayer we see a humbled Samson. he recognises God as the sovereign king of all. He feels so distant from his God that he asks his God to remember him. And he asks God to give him strength only this one time. And then he says in verse 30, "And let me die with the Philistines." Or better translated, "Let my soul die with the Philistines." Samson's not asking to be rescued or taken out of this crisis. He prays that God might give him strength one more time to defeat God's enemies and asks that God let his soul die with the Philistines. Samson acknowledges his failures and sees himself as no better than the Philistines. But we're going to see that this is not how God sees Samson. Last page, peeps. Samson asks God to let him die with the Philistines. But God doesn't leave him dead in the rubble. We read in the last verse of Judges 16, "Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the burying place of Manoah his father. And then we're told he judged Israel 20 years. Remember what God said about him in Hebrews, a man of faith. And Samson is going to wake up in the kingdom. Now, as I've been going through this study, I've been seeing all these similarities with the story of the prodigal son. Samson, just like the prodigal son, leaves his father's house and goes down to Gaza and falls in love with Delilah. He gives her his heart and turns his back on his father, only to find that just like the story of the prodigal son, when the son ran out of money, he turned to those he thought were his mates and they deserted him. Just like how Delilah betrayed him to the Philistines for money and then began to afflict him. The prodigal son finds himself feeding pigs and has no food, and Samson has his eyes taken out and is grinding in a prison. The prodigal son decides he's going to go back home, ask his father for forgiveness, and go and work as a servant in his house, realising his unworthiness. And Samson prays to God and asks him to remember him, recognises he's not worthy of his everlasting inheritance, and begs God to let him die where he felt he belonged. But just like the father in the story, who saw him from afar off, took him in and welcomed him back with loving arms, so his brethren and all the house of his father come down and took his body and buried him in the burying place of Manoah his father. When Samson wakes up, he's in his inheritance and ultimately in the kingdom. So 3 things to remember from the life of Samson. You've been chosen before the world began, and God has big plans for you. Don't let the distractions around you steal your hearts. Protect them. And don't ever forget, God works with flawed people.
Well, thanks so much for that, Chris. That was awesome. I think one thing that I took away from the talk was a point you made about how the Judges only tells us the 3 chapters of Samson's life where he sort of stuffs up. And I feel like sometimes we try to focus on all the bad chapters of our lives and where we go wrong, but sometimes it's important to remember the broader picture and to remember that we're making a valiant effort to live a life for God. And even Samson, who all of his life, all of his chapters in the Bible were about all his mishaps, he's still counted in the Hall of Faith and he's going to have eternal life, which I thought was awesome. Thanks to Liv tonight on piano and Ben for your words as well as Sam for his awesome reading. Thanks for that, Sam. I think one more thank you as well is going to Micah Rass, because this is the last class for SYG. We have an activity still to go. But make sure you say thanks for all his efforts with the class and any of the committee as well, because he's put in a great effort to bring Well, it's been a really awesome series of talks on life-changing moments, so make sure you say thanks and to the committee as well. I'm not sure who's on the committee, but I won't get them to stand up, so I'm sure Mike will pass it on. We're going to close with a prayer tonight, but before we do, we're going to sing a song called Love the Lord. Thanks. Father in heaven, we come before you at the end of our night together, having learnt from the example of both Samson and of Josh. We're reminded that you are faithful, that you will not let us be tempted beyond our abilities, but instead will enable us to endure it. We're comforted by the knowledge that you work willingly with flawed people as we stumble over and over again. Help us to continue in our battle against sin. Help us to make the right decisions in the right moments, to continue in our service to you. Help us to talk to others, to talk to you, and to continue to guard our hearts until that day we so long for. We ask for your blessing on the supper we're about to eat, and ask that as we leave tonight, you might be with us as we travel. Make sure that we can make it home safely if it is your will. We leave tonight in your care, asking this through the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out tonight, especially with exams and everything that's going on at the moment. Thanks for coming out for our last night, as Tom said, our last class for the year. But we've still got one more activity night coming up, which I'll talk about in a minute. Thanks again to Brother Chris for the talk. Really enjoyed that, and there's lots of great lessons that we can take away from Samson there, and also to Ben for the short talk on Josh and some more life-changing moments that we can take some lessons for in our lives as well. Thanks also to Tom for being chairman at short notice tonight, and to Liv for playing in Sumwell. Thanks to Tim as well for helping out with streaming, and to all the hosts. So, just find where I'm up to. Collection details are on the screen. If you do have cash, we do have a jar as well, or can come give it to me if you trust me. We've also, I'll just put the next slide up. So we've reached our target for the year of $500 raising for Kimbilio. So that's another great effort. So thanks everyone for your contributions to that. We sent the final payment today actually. So thank you very much. So the next youth group, I believe, is a suburban outing next Saturday. I believe it's 1:30 to 5 p.m, but I might be wrong. And that's at Harndorf, so Birrenberg Farm for strawberry picking, and then some mini golf after that. So hopefully the weather will be good for that. A couple other things that I forgot to mention was we're planning for 2024 program. So if you are able to help out with playing the piano, we'd really appreciate if you're able to help with that next year, as we would like a few more numbers if you can. I'm also going to announce again, I'm guessing Uncle Steve would like me to announce, if you're interested in being involved with Prince of Egypt, go chat to him, whether that's as an actor, singer, prop maker, whatever. That's going to be happening over end of year studies, so yeah, if you're keen to be involved with that, go chat to him. Our next Southern is our beach breakup. So that's going to be at Noarlunga. So God willing, in 2 Fridays' time. We're still finalising some of the details, but probably going to be starting from 6 p.m, and there'll be a special dinner, which Sai has promised will be really good. And there'll be a meditation by Nahum, who I believe is sending a recording, so he won't be there. But if that's not enough to motivate you, we've also got this fantastic gentleman who's going to be there, so get excited for that. And if you're still needing more motivation, here's some of the cool things that happened last year. So enjoy the rest of your night, and for those who are from Brighton and Happy Valley, please help out the people on supper after this and with clean up. Thanks everyone.